Y-O.
That sound.
Yeah, that's a cry that once echoed through the streets of old New York, right? The namesake of a really dominant force back then.
Absolutely. A name that meant trouble.
So today on the Deep Dive, we're digging into the Whyos Gang. They were this collection of street gangs, mostly active after the Civil War.
That's right. Late 1860s up to the early 1890s, roughly. And they held major sway over a lot of Manhattan.
Okay. And we're drawing on historical records for this, like police reports, newspapers.
Exactly. Documentation detailing their activities, who was in charge, and, how it all eventually fell apart.
Right. Our mission here is to really unpack how this gang rose, how they operated their methods. Were pretty unique, sometimes brutal, and just figure out their place in NYC crime history.
And there are some genuinely surprising, kind of stark details about their operations that really paint a picture.
Okay, let's dive in. Where did they even come from? How did the Whyos get started?
Well, it really kicks off after the NYPD started cracking down hard on the older Five Points gangs. We're talking around 1866 to 1868.
Ah, so one group gets pushed down, another pops up.
Pretty much. It created a sort of power vacuum. The very first Whyos actually came from an existing gang, the Chichesters.
The Chichesters. Okay, I've never heard of them.
Yeah, they were one of the groups around then. But the Whyos, starting from that core, they didn't stay small. They were ambitious.
So they absorbed others.
Exactly. They pulled in rivals, grew fast, and by the early 1870s, they were the dominant force in the Fourth Ward.
A Fourth Ward.
Yeah.
So a known territory, right? An Irish slum, lots of crime already.
Precisely. A tough area. And that name, the Whyos, it came directly from that distinctive gang cry they used.
What? Oh, like a signal or something?
Yeah, kind of a signature sound. You heard that. You knew who was around.
A bit chilling, I imagine. And you said they controlled most of Manhattan. That seems like a huge claim. How long did that last?
It's pretty accurate for the time. Their peak influence was really from the late 1860s, maybe early 70s, right through into the early 1890s. That's a good couple of decades.
Wow. Who were the big names keeping that control? The key leaders?
Well, there are a few prominent ones. Danny Lyons stands out. He got arrested eventually for murdering another gangster, Joseph Quinn.
Okay.
And his girlfriend, believe it or not, pretty Kitty McGowan, she was apparently quite influential within the gang structure, too.
Interesting. A woman holding power in that kind of world back then?
Yeah, not unheard of, but definitely notable. And then there was Danny Driscoll. He's probably one of the most famous, partly because of how his story ended.
Which was?
He was hanged. Convicted of murdering Beezy Garrity. Happened during a gunfight with another gangster, Johnny McCarthy, from 5 Points.
So infighting and rivals.
Yeah.
Led to a pretty final end for him. These weren't guys dying of old age.
Not typically, no. Life was violent. Speaking of which, their hangouts, their headquarters. Some were infamous.
Yeah, I read they had a few spots.
They did. Moved around a bit. Their original base, though, was this tavern on the Bowery called the Morgue.
The Morgue. Seriously.
Seriously. Grim name, grim place. Later on, they used a saloon on Christie Street run by someone called Dry Dollar Sullivan.
Catchy nickname.
Yeah. And strangely enough, they even used a churchyard sometimes, corner of Prince and Mott Streets. Used it for meetings.
A churchyard. Okay, that's unexpected, but back to the Morgue. Sounds like it lives up to its name.
Oh, it absolutely did. The stories about the violence there are, well, extreme. Some accounts claim at least 100 murders happened inside that tavern in its early years.
100? Yeah.
Mostly gunfights between their own members. Drunken brawls escalating, just incredibly violent.
It's staggering. Paints a very bleak picture. So who were these guys? What kind of person joined the Whyos?
Predominantly Irish-American, which kind of reflects the neighborhood, the Fourth Ward at that time.
Right.
But here's a key difference from earlier Irish gangs. The Whyos didn't care who they victimized. It wasn't just rival gangs or other ethnic groups. They went after anyone.
No boundaries then. And membership. Any specific requirements? Besides being tough, I guess.
Well, under Driscoll and Lyons, it got really dark. They apparently had a rule, a requirement to be considered a real Whyo. You had to have committed at least one murder.
Get out. Really? You had to kill someone to be fully in.
That was the standard they reportedly set. It tells you a lot about the kind of organization they were building.
Yeah, it certainly does. And their power. Was it respected or just feared?
Both, probably. Their power grew so much that other smaller gangs operating in the city often had to, get their permission to even run their own rackets.
Wow. Like a criminal overlord system. Paying tribute almost.
Sort of, yeah. They demanded that level of deference. It shows how dominant they were in the underworld hierarchy.
Okay, so extreme violence, a murder requirement.
Yeah.
What else were they involved in? What were their main criminal activities?
Oh, it was a broad portfolio. Street fighting, knife fighting, sure, but also assault, robbery, arson, rioting, definitely extortion, and they ran prostitution rings too.
So the whole 9 yards?
Pretty much. But what's really interesting, historically speaking, is that the Whyos were actually pioneers in some ways. They developed methods that later gangs and eventually more organized crime syndicates in the 20th century would adopt and refine.
Innovators in crime. That's a weird thought. Like what? Can you give an example?
Sure. Take a guy named Josh Hines. Always carried pistols, apparently.
Hmm.
His specialty was extorting illegal gambling dens, like faro games.
Faro, yeah, big back then.
Right. Hines would just walk in and demand a percentage of the profits from the owners. Just straight up demand it.
Bold.
Incredibly. There's this story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, where a detective asks him about shaking these places down. And Hines apparently just says, "Those guys must be nuts. Don't I always leave them something? All I want is me fair share."
His fair share. Wow, that systematic taking of a cut. That feels different from just random robbery.
Exactly. It's a step towards organized extortion rackets, like protection money almost.
Yeah.
Future gangs definitely picked up on that model.
Okay. And it wasn't just about the money, right? I recall reading about some particularly nasty individuals, specialized tools even.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Bandy, Johnny Golan. He's infamous for that.
Bandy Johnny. What did he do?
He actually invented unique weapons, really gruesome stuff. One was a pair of shoes that had axe blades embedded in the soles.
Axe blades
Yeah.
in his shoes.
Yeah, and maybe even worse, he had this copper device he wore on his thumb. It was an eye gouger.
Oh, God. An eye gouger.
And he used it. In 1875, during a robbery of a jewelry store owner, James Noe, Dolan didn't just beat him, he gouged the man's eyes out.
He actually took his eyes.
Yes, and apparently they found the eyes on Dolan later when they questioned him. Just horrific. He was hanged for murder, eventually.
That's beyond brutal. Just a different level of viciousness, axe shoes and eye gougers. It seems like things only intensified later on under Mike McGloin.
Yeah, McGloin took over leadership in the late 1870s, early 1880s, and under him, the focus really shifted even more towards the business side, if you can call it that. Extortion, prostitution, and especially murder for hire became central operations.
Murder for hire, so contract killing, basically.
Pretty much. And McGloin, he doubled down on that whole one murder requirement for membership. There's a quote attributed to him from around 1883.
What did he say?
Something like, "A guy ain't tough until he has knocked his man out," meaning until he'd killed someone.
So that wasn't just Driscoll and Lyons, it became institutionalized.
It seems so, a real dark rite of passage.
And McGloin, did he last long, given the track record?
Nope, predictably, maybe. He was arrested in 1884 for murdering a saloon owner. And like Driscoll, he was hanged.
Another leader meets the noose. This really hammers home the brutality, which I guess leads us to that infamous price list.
Ah, yes, the price list. Truly chilling.
Found on a member named Piker Ryan, right, when he got arrested.
That's the story. Found on him in 1884. And it's just this itemized menu of violence.
Okay, lay it out for us. What was on this list?
It's incredibly matter-of-fact. Punching someone.
Yeah.
$1.
I'm-
Dollar, both eyes blacked. $3. Nose and jaw broke. $7. Being jacked out, knocked unconscious with a blackjack. $15.
$15 for knocking someone out.
Same price. $15 for chewing someone's ear off.
Chewing.
I know.
Ear off. Same price as a knockout. Okay.
Yeah, the values are skewed, to say the least. Then, leg or arm broke, $19. Shot in the leg,
Yeah.
$20. A stab wound, $22.
Getting specific now.
Very. And then the big one, doing the big job.
Murder.
Murder! That was listed at $100 and up.
And up. Wow. It's like ordering from a twisted catalog.
It really is. It speaks volumes about how they viewed violence. It was transactional, service they offered, apparently even to each other sometimes. It implies this weird level of organization, brutal efficiency.
$100 for a life. And less for permanent disfigurement, like losing an ear.
Yeah.
Disturbing doesn't cover it. But this kind of intensity, this level of violence, it can't last forever, can it? How did it all fall apart for the Whyos?
No, it couldn't last. Those hangings, McGloin, Driscoll, Lyons in the 1880s were major blows. They lost key leadership.
Took the head off the snake, basically.
And lots of other members were ending up in prison or getting killed off in the ongoing violence. But there was another big factor. New competition.
Oh, and tougher came along.
Someone tougher and maybe smarter in certain ways. Monk Eastman and his Eastman gang emerged in the mid-1890s. They became the new dominant force.
What made them different? How did they displace the Whyos?
Well, one key difference was politics. Eastman and other gangs that rose during that later period, they started making connections with Tammany Hall.
The political machine, so they got protection.
Exactly. Political protection is crucial for organized crime to really thrive long term. The Whyos, for whatever reason, never seemed to forge those strong alliances with the powers that be. They remained more purely street level, in a way.
So they were vulnerable. No safety net when things got tough.
Right. And they were still violent, but maybe becoming less effective. There were signs of internal decay, too.
Like what?
Well, there's this almost comical story, if it weren't so grim, about a gunfight between two Whyos members, Denver Hop and English Charlie.
Okay.
They were arguing over their shares from a robbery, got into a shootout right there, probably in the morgue or a similar place, but they were both so drunk.
Let me guess. They missed.
Completely fired shots, but nobody got hit because they were too intoxicated. Apparently, even the tavern owner just scoffed at them.
Doesn't sound like the fearsome gang from earlier years.
No, it suggests things were getting sloppy, maybe desperate. So between the leadership losses, the lack of political cover, internal conflicts, and maybe just changing times and policing, the Monk Eastman gang basically swept them aside.
Eastman took over Manhattan's underworld.
Pretty much, yeah. They broke up the last remnants of the Whyos. The era was over.
A definitive end then. But their reputation, their name,
Yeah,
must have lingered, right? Did they pop up in books or movies later?
they did, yeah. Mostly in fictionalized ways. Elizabeth Gaffney wrote a novel called Metropolis in 2005 that features them. And way back in 1947, there was a Real Clue Crime Stories comic book issue about them.
Comic books too. Huh.
Yep. And even weirder, maybe, a version of the Whyos actually appears in Marvel Comics, in the Moon Knight series.
Moon Knight fought the Whyos. Okay, that's a
Yeah.
crossover I didn't expect.
Yeah. A modern take. But probably the most well-known reference for people listening might be from TV.
Oh.
In The Sopranos, the term Whyo gets used quite a bit throughout the series.
As like slang for a gangster.
Yeah, basically as a general term for mob guys, organized crime figures. So the name, at least, definitely echoed into modern pop culture.
That's fascinating, how a specific gang's name becomes generic shorthand generations later. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up. We've tracked the Whyos from their origins in the post-Civil War chaos,
Right, rising from the ashes of older gangs.
through their peak dominance of Manhattan, fueled by really extreme violence, that chilling murder requirement, leaders like Driscoll and Lyon.
And McGloin, don't forget him. And that price list, a symbol of their brutal calculus.
Right, the price list. And then their decline, losing leaders, failing to adapt politically, and finally being eclipsed by Monk Eastman's crew.
It's a stark trajectory. They represent a very specific, very violent chapter in New York's crime history, maybe less sophisticated politically than what came later, but incredibly impactful in their time.
So thinking about their whole story, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the core factors that always seem to drive the rise and then the inevitable fall of these kinds of criminal groups?
Power, violence, opportunity, adaptation, or the lack of it.
Yeah. And what does the Whyos story specifically tell us about that particular moment, late 19th century New York, the immigrant experience, the limits of law enforcement then, the sheer brutality that could take hold?
It reveals a lot about the harsh realities of urban life and the struggle for control in a rapidly changing city.
And maybe one last thought to leave people with.
Hmm.
Do you see any echoes of their specific tactics today? That raw, almost business-like approach to violence laid out in the price list, does any aspect of that resonate, even in the more complex world of modern organized crime?
That's a deep question. The methods evolve, the structures change, but the commodification of violence, maybe that core element in some form persists. Definitely something to chew on.